we should build AI for Indian languages, right? Because it was an interesting problem. India is so diverse, very rich culture, and it shows in our languages. So many different scripts, so many different unique ways of speaking. And we said it's a good challenge to build AI for Indian languages. You should have the ability to build it yourself because that gives a very different stance to who we are as a country, right? And I think this is very, very important for strategic technologies. And I think it is very true for AI.
Hi, my name is Amrit. We've heard that IIT Madras is the best place to build. So we've come down to the Sudhan Shankar Innovation Hub. We want to meet some people. These are builders. We want to talk to them about their work and also ask them what makes IIT Madras the best place to build. Hi, and welcome to the Best Place to Build podcast. This is Amritash. Today I'm sitting with Pratyush, the co-founder and CEO of Sarvam AI. Hi, Pratyush.
Right.
Pratyush, you like to stay away from the limelight for good reason. So if it's okay, I will run an introduction. Pratyush runs Sarvam, one of India's hottest AI startups. They solve for AI for India, so Indian languages, Indian use cases, speech to text, text to speech translation, and of course LLM. Company has raised funding from Peak 15, formerly Sequoia, Khosla Ventures, and Lightspeed. You should know that Khosla Ventures was an early investor in OpenAI also. Recently, it was also announced that by the Honorable Minister Ashwini Vaishnav that Sarvam has been selected by the Government of India to build India's sovereign LLM under the India AI mission. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The TLDR version is that Sarvam is one of India's hottest AI companies and is deeply linked to India's AI objectives. And Pratyush leads Sarvam. Hi, Pratyush.
I am there.
That's a very heavy introduction, but I want to say that you were into AI long before this LLM craze began, right? So can you give us a sort of an introduction on how your journey has come to be?
And certainly, thanks for the invite. And it's great to be sitting here in Andajak Garage in IIT Madras. It's definitely a place to build. So glad to be on the podcast. Yeah, my background, I studied electrical engineering at IIT Bombay. I sort of do believe that electrical engineering is a broad topic that teaches you various things, right from understanding linear algebra to writing code, and then went on to do a systems engineering PhD at ETH Zurich, and basically learned more about high performance computing, reliable computing, and so on. So not really AI at that point, but then I joined IBM Research. This was the early time of deep learning. AlexNet had happened, so people were aware that you could just make these models larger and get more out of them. But interestingly, the area was taking a turn. It was going from one where the algorithms mattered a lot, especially algorithms for computer vision, image, for video, for audio separately, versus it becoming very compute driven, where you have to build efficient systems on very large amounts of data, and you did much better. So at IBM Research, I got to see a bit of that. I started working in this area and then decided that it's an important area that it's worth doing fundamental research on. So I joined IIT Madras here as a faculty member in the computer science department, and I met a very willing colleague in Mitesh Kabra, and we decided to say let's focus on building AI.
This was when?
Uh, I should check my dates, but I think it was 2017, if I remember. And we decided to think about what is the practical thing that we could do with this technology, but with a focus for India. Right? And that's when we started AI4Bharat, right? And the intention was to build technology that is using the best-in-class methods that a company like Meta or Google would use because they have access to compute and data, but do it in a way that is locally relevant. Right.
Okay.
So as part of it, broadly, we ran large courses on deep learning. We also ran efforts on hackathons and so on. And then finally, we converged on the fact that we should build AI for Indian languages, right? Because it was an interesting problem. India is so diverse, very rich culture, and it shows in our languages. So many different scripts, so many different unique ways of speaking. And we said it's a good challenge to build AI for Indian languages, and that's where the journey began.
Nice. So, just before we get into Sarvam, um, what is AI for Bharat? I understand that you said that it started as something from the offshoot of your course, and I think right from the bat it attracted a lot of interest, right? So what was it started as, and what is it now?
Yeah, so we ran online courses on deep learning, Nitesh and I, with an intent of making it very hands-on. These were the days when we were teaching people how to use PyTorch, etc. And that was a very popular course. Over 50,000 folks did that course online.
50,000.
Yes.
Okay.
It was, I was just giving a keynote at AWS's event 2 days back, and in the backstage, the person who was there said, "I just did your course, and now I'm at AWS building stuff." So it's very gratifying to see, um, and that was a good experience. We could have done more of that, but then we thought, let's leverage the community that we have, the understanding we have, to sort of like have a broader hacker motion around building for AI in India. But that didn't work very well. We had a decentralized setup where we said people can come sign up for problems and then solve them offline. But that didn't really work out. So we instead then decided that we'll take one or two problems which we run out of our lab and get it built with the help of students plus volunteers, right? And that's when we pivoted towards Indian language AI. So it started with research lab, so to speak. I remember about a dozen CFI students were the sort of the founding members of that. And then what we did was we started building these components. For example, one of the first MS students I had built something very trivial but very important, which is high quality web scrapers on top of Indian web, right? Okay. Because this whole thing starts with the data flywheel, right?
Yeah.
So, sort of like a series of things added up. And in about a year, we had built translation systems, right, that can translate from English to Indian languages and vice versa, which were competitive with text offerings, right? And that attracted attention. We managed to receive support financially from the government of India as part of the Kashini project, and also philanthropic money from Nandal Nilekani. In fact, Nilekani Foundation is now a key sponsor of AI for Bharat. And AFOI continues as a very successful center of excellence at IIT Madras. It's probably over 200 people now, both the language experts and the researchers working there, and probably is the foremost lab doing open source work on Indian language AI, right? So it's really matured. And I'm very glad to tell you that Sarvam is now deeply collaborating with the AI for Bharat, both from a research perspective and understanding how to take these technologies with LLM work.
So you were a faculty at IIT Madras in the computer science department. You were collaborating with Professor Mitesh, who's still a faculty at IIT Madras for AI for Bharat, and then you started Sarvam. So maybe you can just give us that segue of why did you start with Sarvam? Who are your main collaborators in Sarvam, and build that story a bit for us.
As I also spent some time at Microsoft Research. I was seeing what was happening broadly in the AI space. There was the GPT stuff that was happening. So it was clear that we need to take a more uh, foundational view of building this technology. Unlike things like translation systems, which can be built with, about $100,000 of compute, you need a lot more money to be able to build production grade large language model, right? So we decided to start Sarvam. It was actually a co-founder, Vivek Raghavan, who also has an interesting background, sort of built successful startups in the US, IT Delhi guy, CMU, and then came back to India very early and decided to work towards digital public infrastructure, as it's called. In fact, he was one of the founding members of Aadhaar, continues to remain involved with them 15 years hence, and built various parts of it, including the latest face recognition stuff that received the Prime Minister's award, the technology. Right? So we decided that we should start something with venture capital and build it out. And so we started Sarvam, and the goal was let's build from scratch LLMs and whatever is to come in this line of technology. in India for India. So a bit of a contrarian bet to say that let's build for India. People talk about it being a small market, low ARPU, and so on. But we said it's actually a large market, and it's actually a very early cycle of a long evolving technology. And so let's focus and build this technology in India.
I mean, if you're from an Aadhaar background and you've seen UPI, then you know that Aadhaar and UPI scale way beyond anything anybody imagined, right? So
India's role in AI, I think, is a bit interesting because scale is one of the key things that distinguishes this technology from others, right? What I mean by that is two things. One, this technology continues to scale on axes such as the size of the model, the amount of data you have, and so on. So you need to do bigger and bigger things to make this technology better, right? And it's not very clear what those limits are currently. There are some limits, but it's not very clear. So you need to have a path towards scale. And one path towards scale is what the US shows with extremely large uh, big tech companies, right? Another path to scale is probably what China does, right? With a very heavy handed government. I think India's path to scale, at least in the last decade, that has been successful is public private partnership on top of open platforms like UPI because it's extremely scalable, low cost utility service that provides open standards. But then people can come and innovate in the private sector and build on top of it. And people have built very successful businesses on top of that, right? I think that's a model that we feel AI can evolve towards. Still, you need the scale, but you need it probably in a way in which we can leverage both uh, the the population scale deployments, but at the same time ensure that the models get better uh, from these deployments.
Pratyush, I want to go deeper into that, but before that, you mentioned the word foundation, and I'll be honest with you, I don't really know what a foundation model is I mean, I know that these are foundation models, but I don't know what that means. And I'm curious to know from you to go from whatever a foundation model is to an application, there must be a lot of steps involved. And what are all these things? Um, who are building them separately and why should we invest in each of these?
Good question. So of course, a model is used to characterize one of these AI systems. So they can model something. Often it is language or images, etc. Foundation models are seen as models which are so general purpose and that they don't try to have a particular skill. Let's say, for example, writing code necessarily, or let's say analyzing X-ray images, but are more generally capable. Right. So foundation models, loosely defined, is a general purpose uh, model that can be with language and nowadays audio and images and so on, right? And there are many large companies in the world building it. Of course, as you know, OpenAI has been building it on the first bet that we can keep scaling it and get really good models. Companies like Google have been building it. Meta has been building it. Of course, there are companies in China building these. Right? At least 2 to 3 very large efforts in China as well. So in some sense, it is one of those. Why it's also called foundations because on top of it, we can build various things like a code assistant or the ability to analyze legal documents and summarize what's happening there. So I think the reason why different people are building them is because um, it is believed that various things we are doing either in the customer connect world or in the internal productivity world will have some amount of AI presence. Right? And because such a large and general purpose statement, many folks are trying to build it. Right? Imagine being in the 1800s and seeing that you have the steam engine
Yeah.
and figuring out where all can it show up. Right? And it's happening significantly faster because the cycles are down to months instead of decades. And it's digital, so it can be replicated, moved around, and so on. So there's a lot of value to be created in this space. And hence, we should think about building them. The other important point is I think it is one of those technologies that we think of as being in the strategic nature, right? If we talk about space or about nuclear, we quantum, we think of these as strategic because the outcomes they deliver can be extraordinary, right? I think AI seems to be in that ballpark, and hence it is also important for us to, in the country, have the ability to build it. So there's a commercial imperative, but it's actually a super large market, and the amount of investments that have gone into it is very large. But also there's a strategic element to it.
Um, I have like 2 or 3 follow-up questions on that. Just to cement my understanding, a foundation model, on top of that, you build applications. So something like a Perplexity is an application layer, right?
So obviously it's a company, right? The way I would say it is web search uh, on top of LLMs would be an application.
Okay.
Or the ability to draw images of a particular style is an application, or the ability to reach out to customer care with voice-to-voice bots is an application. So these are applications.
And in the case of ChatGPT, OpenAI, they are building the application layer and the model themselves.
OpenAI is building, of course, the models, right? The GPT models. And then they're enabling different people to build on top of that. Right? They do build some applications. Maybe the ChatGPT website itself is an application and becoming a popular one. But they enable others to then build applications on.
Okay. Between the application layer and the foundation layer, are there other things in between?
Yeah. So, in fact, we see ourselves as a full stack company. Again, another contrarian bet as opposed to doing one layer. We see it as 4 layers.
Okay.
At the bottom is the ability to run these models, right? This is of it's called inferencing, which is how do you ensure that the tokens that you produce from the models are actually efficiently done, right? So that the cost of serving these models can be low. And you need to figure out how to run GPUs well, how to compile your models down, how to optimize it, and so on. The layer above is the model building itself, right? And these could be, of course, they're LLMs, but there could be vision models, there could be audio models, and so on. And there could be even a multiplicity of models. Above that is something which we call orchestration layer,
Okay.
which is if you want to build any application on top, typically you'll have to put together these models and other code efficiently and scalably. Uh, for example, we have at least 2 orchestrations in the company, one around real-time voice bots and another around more complex reasoning systems, right? So that's the orchestration layer, and then this is solid software engineering stuff, right? And the layer above that is applications. And the reason we separate applications for some orchestration is because uh, an application to be built by a domain expert,
Hmm.
right? If you're building a voice bot to explain to users about your insurance scheme, then you can do that without worrying about the layers below and thinking really about what is the insurance scheme, what do people care about, the emotional design around it, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So that's why we separate these 4 layers.
Okay. So inference, and then I couldn't figure out what this is.
Models themselves, and then the orchestration and application layer.
Inference models, orchestration, application. Interesting. And I think I heard you talk about it in somewhere else, that there's also a lot of challenge in organizing the data to sort of make these models.
Yes. So the two raw materials are and probably 3, 4 raw materials for models. Right. One is, of course, you need lots of data. You need lots of compute, right? And you need talent because this is not openly discussed research methodology around how to train these models. There are still there's still some unknowns out there in the open domain. So data is one of the key raw materials for training a model because you're talking about um, these models requiring trillions of words to be trained, right? And if it is audio, then it could be hundreds of thousands of hours of audio and stuff like that. So yes, data becomes an important topic.
And I guess also, again, in the context of Indian languages, the data availability is much less compared to uh, an English language, right?
That is true. That is true. So there are multiple aspects to that. One is there are large number of Indian languages, and not all of them have enough data. That is one. Secondly, there is the culture in those languages. They're not fully digitized. And so we first one is more standard language tokens are required. Token is a subword or half a word typically that is used to train these models. So there are language tokens you need for language understanding and fluency, but there's also culture tokens, tokens that represent the culture, which might be in an old book, even undigitized material, which needs to be put out there. Uh, and the third thing is that there is also new ways of using language that have evolved over time. For example, how do you type Hindi or Bengali, etc., on the keyboard, right? You would use the Romanized keyboard and still type that, right?
Yeah.
That is, of course, a new, and that's how language should be. It should be evolving.
Yeah.
So you need to also represent these aspects.
Yeah.
Of language.
And in Indian languages, because somebody was telling me about words that have actually never been translated, like secretariat, internet. Most languages, they just use the word internet, and so on.
Yeah, we call that code mixing. In fact, it's very interesting. If you've been tracking how language is being used officially in things like SMS messages, there are English words in the Roman alphabet in between an Indic sentence.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We are so malleable as a culture to absorb them, right? So these are the kinds of things you need to map out, right? Can these models be good on Romanized Hindi, Tamil plus English in between, etc.? Yeah.
Very nice. Very interesting. So, right. So there are 4 layers, and in addition to the layers, before the layers, there's data, compute, talent to solve for. So it's a large thing. You're in it in all the layers, but also in such a way that others can build application on top of the Sarvam layers, right?
Yeah. So the way we think about it is, so just to give you a sense, just go a little bit deeper here. What we do on the inferencing layer, for example. So inside the Aadhaar building, there's actually a set of GPU boxes which contain our models.
What do you mean inside the Aadhaar building? Sorry.
So ours, I mean, it's as in some sense sovereign as it gets. UIDAI is the authority that runs the ALIA program,
Yeah.
right? And it's a completely air-gapped system because it's so critical for as a national infrastructure. And so if they had to do AI, how would they do it, right? So just to characterize that, in the basement of Aadhaar, we have a set of boxes. Um,
You're physically talking about building.
Basically, we're talking about physically talking about basement boxes and so on, just like the super real GPUs,
Okay.
which contain in them server models and the orchestration layer, and bots built on top to deal with things like calls that can go out to citizens when things like biometric fails, right? So that is the stack. You need to think about the compute. How is this a compute actually run all these complex models? What are the models that are required to do a particular task well? It's often just not the model, but anything around it. That is the orchestration, right? How do you keep this thing running? How do you have telemetry? How do you have low latency? How do you have reliability, scalability? And finally, there's application. So in this case, it is a call going out to a senior citizen when biometric fails, right? Or take the example of a large insurance company who we are working with. Uh, when there is a renewal that is due, they would like to inform the customers at scale. We're talking about crores of people in their language about what is this insurance scheme, what does it provide, right? And what benefits does it provide? How do you use it, and so on. So that is the application layer, and we work with partner companies to then build applications for them on top of the stack.
Okay. Okay. I understand. I mean, I've seen often when people talk of applications, they give very simple examples, but the examples you're giving are actually large, complicated example. I remember one example from earlier where somebody was talking about Supreme Court judgments being available in multiple languages and things like that, which is, I guess, simpler than what you're saying.
That's also an important use case. In fact, we are working closely with a few high courts. There's a mandate from the Supreme Court to make judgments available in local languages, but it's not a trivial problem because it doesn't fall under the usual translate kar do kind of a scheme, right? Because there's legal language, there are words that need to be retained in a particular way. There's some things that require
Oh, the
simplification.
the cost of an inaccuracy is also pretty high, right?
Cost of inaccuracy is high, but I see it more as optimizing for accessibility, right?
Yeah.
You want the judgments to be available to people in a way in which they can understand it. It's a common joke that you can't read legal language, right? So that is the key thing there. But
Now you can't read legal language in your own language.
yes, no, the intention is to make it simpler. No, but that use cases are actually very, very diverse. I'll give you another one just for sake of difference. We're working with Niti Aayog, which is the primary think tank body of the government of India, to take data sets available across central ministries and the state governments. There are about 5,000 very large tables that Niti Aayog has right now. and build a layer by which you can ask a question in natural language. And in response to it, AI would first introspect which of these tables should I look at. And there's a huge number of tables, right? Identify the right ones, write code, typically in Python, to access the data, to massage it. Often it will make mistakes in this writing of code, it self corrects, then gets the data, analyzes it, writes a report with the plot, or
Nice.
depending on what the question requires. And we've been building this for the last quarter, and it's working very well. What it does is it builds disintermediates policy work from data, right? And often there are many, many steps required to go from policy work and the question that you might have from policy perspective to actually seeing the data and the results. It completely takes that away. And not just data in tables, but also things like PDFs. And you might have economic survey of many, many years, which contain insights in different parts. They're able to also look at that, combine it with the data, and give a result. That's another use case. And I think this is going to be the other very large mode of consumption of AI, which is doing your work much better, especially in dealing with large amounts of data.
Nice. I think the example you gave, many times policymakers want to get a policy report on something, say, like where to build a highway or where to invest in a particular crop. And by the time the report is ready, their stint has moved, they moved on to another location, another stint, or the politicians have changed because there's a democracy and so on. So I guess the impact of having quicker access to reports will be really large, right?
Yeah, I think so. So it works across the hierarchy. Even the leaders, I guess, they ought to get real about what it is that the data says, instead of hearing various layers of PT.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right. So I think it works across the hierarchy, and yeah, data is what we should be driving policy decisions on. But that promise has never been true earlier.
Nice. So cool. I think we are sort of skirting around the topic, but let's get to it. What is sovereign AI? What does it mean? What is the context? A lot of countries are getting into it. It's not just India. So, what are all the other countries doing? What is India's focus in this?
Yeah. No, I just want to start with saying something else, right? So we are shooting this at a time when the armed forces are battling in the borders. And firstly, thanks to all the effort that the Jawans are doing, which ensures that we are sitting here chatting. The reason I say that is because I don't think everything is out there yet, but um, a lot of the success that the Indian Army had, in the armed forces had, was because of indigenously built technology over the last decade, right? And so, in some sense, the way I see it is, you need better tech to have the upper hand.
Can I just ask you a question? Did it surprise you that so much Indian tech was used?
Yes, yes. I was not sufficiently educated about what's happening in that space, and I was surprised. Yes,
Yeah, so was I. I was like surprised, but also proud in a sense that okay, we are here that so much Indian tech could get used.
correct. And I think we should know more about it, especially in places like here in Madras, because see, you need superior tech to have the upper hand, right? But in today's world, I think you need strategic autonomy to have the winning hand. Right? And what does that mean, right? You don't want to decouple from the world. India has never wanted to decouple from anybody. But you need to have the ability to build things down south from scratch, as we say, yourself, right? Happy to collaborate with whoever in the world to build whatever, but you should have the ability to build it yourself because that gives a very different stance to who we are as a country, right? And I think this is very, very important for strategic technologies. And I think it is very true for AI. And that is the sort of the mood under which the sovereign AI is being discussed, right? So one is that ability to have the talent, the resources to build this tech grounds up yourself. The second one is the ability to use it at scale, right? You need compute, you need power, you need application developers to then leverage the foundational technology to create value for citizens, right? In fact, I think uh, just like power, electricity consumption was used as a proxy of development for the last couple of decades or even more. I think AI could start looking like that soon. It's that kind of a general purpose technology which helps productivity. It helps, deal with misinformation as strategic sector use cases. It might start looking like your per capita consumption of AI is a decent proxy for how advanced or competitive you are as a country. Right. So in that context, right, the idea of sovereign model is to be able to build it in India, grounds up, have the talent that can start building it now, but notice that we are very, very early in what is going to be a long technological cycle. And so in 2030, what is the world building in AI and how close are we to the state of the art? Right. Um, that's the kind of thing that we should optimize for. And that requires us to start building now, grounds up. And that's the mood in which I think of sovereign networks.
Very interesting. Also interesting that you said long technology cycle, that's in 19 to 2030, which is just 5 years ahead. Like, I think when we talk of long technology cycles, in the past, it's been like 30 years, 40 years, 10 years. Now it's just like we're talking about 5 years and everything will change.
The interesting thing is 5 years will change, but there's also the 30-year window, right? It's not even clear to most people what it looks like
What it'll
30
look
years
like.
later.
Okay, so just a little bit more detail on that. Um, Other countries are also building their sovereign AI. So, are you saying that they also are thinking of data, compute, talent, models that they own, that the country has access to? Maybe the government doesn't own it, but a set of companies in that space own it, in that country own it.
Yeah, so I think ownership, etc. These are details that different countries will figure out differently. But I know that Japan has a sovereign AI program. South Korea has one. France, which was the host of the AI summit last time, we were the co-host. They have a large program. Various other countries like UK have announced large investments, right? Because it's just for you to recognize it's actually ball that needs to be set rolling. For example, look at GPUs because the India AI mission, which is the government's flagship program, uh, invested in building these models. You're going to get large amount of GPU compute coming into the country, right? So in this case, the government is catalyzing it. I don't think the government should be uh, the only one building it out or supporting it, but a catalysis is required. Where, for example, can we have compute uh, of the scale necessary to build out these models, to consume these models, etc. And I think we are far from that right now. There's a long way for us to go. But I see that India being in the medium term a very large producer and consumer of this technology, right? And that job starts now, and we should then be able to also help the broad global south with this key technology, like we've done in other cases.
Sure, fine, makes sense. But if you look at the India compared to the countries you're talking about, South Korea, Japan, France, or others, they have a single language uh, in the entire country. That's like France speaks French. I don't know if there are other languages. Maybe if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me. But in India, they're like, I don't know, many languages, right? So our problem is uniquely different.
Yes, the problem is more challenging. It's not. In fact, people don't recognize it enough. Which you really truly were to build AI that works for everybody. In fact, Sarvam in Sanskrit means everyone, because the intention is that they should be used by everyone. Um, that's a very hard problem, right? But can we target that first 10, first 15, first 22 languages? In fact, what we are going for now is the first 22 scheduled languages as per the constitution. It's definitely harder problem still, right? But I think it's something that can be worked at and one can optimize. So language is important.
Can I ask you a question? Will it be possible someday that in the upper house or the lower house, somebody is speaking in their own language and everybody has headphones where they can hear it in their own language?
Why not? In fact, there was recently a podcast between Lex Friedman and Narendra Modi, right? And the team put out later videos of Narendra Modi's speech in different languages, right? In his own voice. In fact,
But that was not live.
not live. So that was the Prime Minister's office themselves tweeting it. But this can be taken live. Okay?
Okay.
These things are becoming much faster that they can be taken live. And speech-to-speech translation is a fairly well understood problem, and one can look at it. The ability to do it in their own voice and that intonation gives it even more power, right? So I certainly believe we can do this.
Nice. Um, Also, I think, and we sort of discussed it before the podcast a bit, from a government of India or from a national perspective, there's been a lot of investment in these large population size problems from Aadhaar to UPI to now Sarvam AI. Can you give us some to now LLM, sovereign LLM? So can you give us some like context around that?
Um, yeah, so I mean, the build out of, let's say, Aadhaar is a good example where technology of the cutting edge was used by the government to build out uh, a unique example in the world. For example, in the US, there is a little bit of tension between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C., right? But India,
Little bit is okay.
yeah, maybe
There is
not.
tension.
There is fair tension and keeps changing it.
There's an X amount of tension and X changes with time.
And X is also a loaded word in that context.
Right.
But yeah, I think India has shown that you could sort of like bring these two things together. Uh, get great technocrats to come build technology which is cutting edge. Look at Bijiaja, right? Which other country has something that works so seamlessly, and that's all tied to the same identity system that we have, right? And I think the core principles there were build cutting edge tech, have open standards, right? Allow people to build on top of it. For example, the enrollment on the mobile phones that happened in the last decade, right? Huge spurt of it, or online banking accounts that happened on top of ID systems, which made it very easy to do eKYC, to actually for even institutions like banks to have the confidence that they can transact online, completely new customs, right? So I think this principle of thinking of utility, technology providing best in class utility, that is somehow has the stamp of government, the trust of government, the scale of government, and then people building on top, right? I think that's a great example, and then followed through with UPI payment system with so many transactions right now, and a few other things. There is the FASTag thing that happened. Then there is, of course, NPCI was created that does many other things now, including payments for utility bills, etc. So I guess this is a good template, and it's encouraging to think about. I don't think in AI we have yet figured out what that model is.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask when you use the word open. I mean, not in the context of OpenAI, but open standards. You mentioned open standards, which is, I guess, different from open source. And which parts of the entire AI setup is going to be open standard, which is going to be open source, and what parts of it will be common to all, and what parts of it will be proprietary?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I think, as I was saying, I think the in the AI world this has not been fully understood. But the sort of the metaphor that I carry forward is to think of AI as utility, right?
Okay.
Just like you access today UPI with UPI's API, or you have ONBC with sort of APIs for looking at catalogs and so on. They are utilities. I think AI should be seen as a utility. Its serving should be so efficient and available and cost effective that people then are encouraged to build applications on top of it. Right? Somebody building an education application should be able to build it and make available widely. Right? In fact, I think I was talking about tokens, which is what these LLMs work with. About half a word is a token. Um, it's easily possible to imagine that in the country in a few years, every person has access to lakhs of tokens per day, right? Because whatever you do, whether it's work, whether it's health, whether it's family, whether it's mental well-being, in various aspects of life, you can leverage this technology. And if it was available as a utility and developers built very interesting stuff on top, I think there will be a widespread use.
Understood.
That's the world we have to go
And you
towards.
said that then AI use per capita would be something that we would start thinking about, and that would.
I think it's a good metaphor in my mind because it just tells you the scale we can achieve, right? Given the size of our country and the need, size of the country, the tech readiness, if we have adopted digital at a huge scale.
Good proxy for what?
A good proxy for how big India's use case in AI would be, right? Because today we don't have a sense of how many GPUs do we need in the country, right? Why should we be building these models? This costs so many dollars. Why should we be building it, right? Because if every citizen was X percentage more productive, was X percentage able to utilize this in their day-to-day lives, the connect between a citizen and the government was X percentage more effective. That outcome is very large, right? And we should be thinking about how we can make that happen with AI as utility and then developers building on top of.
Understood. So AI per capita would sort of give a sense of how much of advanced technology the country is using and therefore is more efficient or more productive or more able to connect with services around themselves.
Correct. And also, I would say,
And I guess it's similar to say UPI transaction or transactions per capita is a good metaphor for the financial strength of a country or the fluidity of a country. So
and that because the UPI that you and I do versus a UPI that somebody in rural Bihar does, the experience is the same, right? And that leveling, that flattening is required, and that's what AI will be able to provide. If you had to ask something to the government about, let's say, some particular payment or something, the experience that you have and somebody has in rural Maharashtra should be the same, right? And I think that is possible. That is why I think technology has been um, that flattener. And with AI, we should aim to do that at a much larger scale.
Pratyush, I'm curious to know. There's a lot of money that's flowing into this business. So I want to understand, why does it need so much money? Where does it get spent? And maybe you can take us through all these layers that you spoke about and what takes the kind of cost that we are talking about.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the primary costs is the training of the model itself, right? And these are large models that need a large number of GPUs to train. And often there is work to be done before that in terms of preparing the data. In fact, the way Jensen Huang from NVIDIA puts it, he thinks of GPU factories. Right. These are just like a normal factory. They are churning off stuff. They churn out even the data. The data sets used for training the models also come from lots of processing that you can do on GPUs. So there's data preparation. There is the model training itself, and often this is a very competitive space globally, so talent is expensive as well to get the best in class people uh, to do this, right? And then it's not enough to just throw a model over the wall. At least in what we are doing, there's also work to be done on the software engineering layers and also then building applications. I see that this is a phase where the technology is still in that early part of that S curve, right? In terms of deployments in India, once we hit scale, once we hit critical mass, I see this extremely profitable, right? So that is also true. In fact, that is one of the reasons we should be building this technology in the country, because the value loops should remain in the country, right? There is value in deploying this technology, using that deployment experience to improve the models further, and this value loop needs to remain local.
Can you just explain that a bit better?
Unlike other technologies, let's say you built a camera, right? And you can put it out in the market and you'll get some feedback. And the next camera that you build can be slightly better. Right? And this probably takes a year, 2 years to get that slightly. With AI, you build a model, you put it out there, you see what's happening with the model. And in a matter of months, you can build an improved model that does well on those kinds of tasks, but at a smaller form factor, maybe reduce the cost or maybe increase the accuracy. Right. And this, I think, of as a value loop that can be created. And this is very fast. It's a matter of months, right? Compound that to a few years, we're talking 2030. We need to have in the country the ability to kickstart these value use
Okay.
to make these things better.
Okay, amazing. So it's prepping the data, training the data, attracting the talent, the cost of the GPUs itself. These are the things that cost that much, right? Will it get lesser? I know you've raised a certain amount of funding. I don't know if it's a low amount or a high amount. Does it feel like it may like be a lot more that you'll need, or maybe it'll turn out that the costs have come down and it's sufficient?
So, firstly, the costs are coming down from what people expected a couple of years back, right? Very large companies in the US have raised hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And that was exorbitant. I think the costs are coming down quickly because people are understanding how to do it more efficiently, but it's still going to be cost prohibitive for multiple folks to do it. Like, it's not there are not going to be hundreds of foundation model builders, right? But there is room for tens of them to be fair, right? And the cost will come down, and there will be more value at different layers of the stack. But to keep pace with the foundational work that's happening across the world, you still need to keep pushing the research thread. So I think many folks could build models at lower price points, but you still need to keep pushing if you want to be close to the state of the art. in building it from scratch.
Okay. Very interesting. Things in AI are moving so fast. I feel like, I mean, I'm in the outside, so it's a little like it's overwhelming. I don't know if you feel so. In fact, can you give us a sense of how it feels like to be in this business? Does it feel like you're in control?
Uh, Yes and no. I think it's definitely moving too fast for comfort. And one of the key things to recognize is to see the medium term horizon uh, strongly enough every day. There might be some fuzzy news of this happened, that happened. I think one needs to see first see the medium term and what you're building very clearly. Also, I think it's important because there's so much money around. There's a lot of uh, I mean, one needs to be conscious of what the key goals are, right? And at least for us at Sarvam, it is about democratizing this technology in a country like India, which is going to have very crucial 3 decades ahead, right? So that's our focus. So that gives us a little bit more stability. We know what we are here for. We're not for build the next week or the next quarter. We have to do something we have to do the interesting things as well, but I think we have that little bit more clarity that we are in the long haul.
Very interesting. And this ecosystem, I think a little bit we wanted to speak about the ecosystem also. I feel, by the way, I feel so lucky because I get to meet people like you, and I know you're very busy. I think it took us, to the audience, it took us 4 months to schedule this. So that's how busy Pratyush gets. And I'm very lucky and I'm very grateful. Mm, is there ecosystem benefits? Are there like benefits to having AI for Bharat here and access to a student community and all of those things? From far, we have heard that a lot of Silicon Valley benefits are simply because there's an ecosystem there. Is that happening here? Is there a network effect that's building up?
Uh, there is, and AI for Bharat and Sarvam is a good example of that. But there's a very, very long way to go for us to connect the academic and student body kind of setup with what's happening in this technology. It's so common in the US for sophomores to think that they could go build a startup, right?
Right.
That is building here. And I'm hearing a lot more from students, especially from IT Madras. But there's a long way to go. And I feel you need to have more institutional support to, in some sense, cross fertilize, right? We need to bring in the VC community, that startup community into the campus much more and expose students to that, right? And um, I think with places like Nirvan, CFI, and IT Madras, you're doing that. But there is room to do much more because every every 6 months is very different. Right?
But is there a fear of, I mean, you mentioned that sophomores in the US have this kind of blind faith. Even on their first year, they'll build something that'll, conquer the world kind of thing. And they have access to those kind of professors and that kind of capital, which is what you're saying, that's what's required. Uh, but they have built that over decades, right? And we are building it in like 5, 10 years, maybe 15 years. Is there a fear that it's going to sort of not build very authentically?
I mean, you have to design systems well. That always remains the case. But I feel that my own personal journey, since I've straddled many of these roads, um, I feel that this is the time to cut the crap. Right? You should either be builders or sellers. Right? Um, and sometimes we remain in abstractions, which are not that helpful, both in academia and in companies, right? And I think a startup is a very good way to get real, right? If you're really building something with your hands and seeing what is coming out, you get super fast feedback, right? And I think that's the thing you should create more of.
Right. So we were talking about ecosystem building, and you were saying that uh, even though we, I mean, in essence, we don't have time. So we have to sort of like really put our heads down, use our hands, and build. That's it.
We should not worry about uh, breaking existing structures. I think if the feedback is very real and very clear, and now I think that's a good system, right? And somebody planning to build and they didn't like it, or they don't have success, they can figure out what to do next, right? But we should throw more energy into this and get people who've done it. I mean, there are enough good startups that have made big success happen in the last decade. We need to get them all here, not for talks. Right? Talks are fine, on or even podcasts. We should get them.
Thanks for that.
No, this is a good starting point. But I think you should get them here for actually helping put together structures that they know from their experience is useful. And I think this mindset of either I'm a builder or I'm a seller, and get really real about it, especially when the world is changing every 6 months, is super important.
Okay. We met Professor Ravindran early in the podcast. He's extremely inspiring, and now he's heading the new AI department. I think we are one of the first of the original IITs to launch an entire new department. Again, well funded, alumni funding, and I don't know whether that means whether the funding is in terms of compute or in terms of cash, but whatever. They have a bunch of new courses, including BTech in AI. So I think there's a lot of talent coming in, right? And what I wanted to ask was, I mean, my original question written down is very different, but now as you're saying it, I'm thinking, is there enough talent coming in? Because the way you have set up this whole problem, it feels like all it requires like 1,000, 2,000 really smart folks to come together, right? Or maybe even more.
Much more, much more. And see, I think we have an education system in the country that's producing certain output. You can't go change that all of a sudden. But in higher education, we have a great advantage. People coming to places like IT Madras, we should instill in them extreme self belief that no matter what, you're fine, right? And this is a time to express yourself, time to build and stuff like that. I think we have a very, I mean, the education problem is much much larger, but I think we are at a point of that pyramid where we should do much more to instill that self belief and make it happen. And by the way, it just doesn't have to be IT Madras students. We can open our doors to other students to come in, as long as you have an engine that can demonstrate to people that this is how you come and build. And the research park is a great example of it. It's just not IT Madras folks. People from outside have come, the station themselves there, building great companies. I just think we should 100x this.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you studied at IIT Bombay. Your co-founders from IIT Delhi, and my dad went to IIT Kharagpur. So quite a mix. And I definitely don't want to be beating the IITM drum too much. Can you give us an idea of what else is happening across the country? Top labs, top universities.
No, certainly. So I think there's a lot happening across all the strategic sectors. Quantum is something that is really taking off with a lot of effort across IITs to do that. Even in AI, there are multiple efforts that are going on, which is very welcome. The I think whether I look at strategic sector, for example, I see a lot more willingness from the government and strategic sector to engage with researchers and startups. So I guess we are in that moment when we realize that for all things we do, whether it is commercial output, uh, ensuring that we are taking care of people across the country or building strategic strength. Technology, especially deep tech, is going to play a key role, right? And I think gone are the days we believe that you should buy every new text that come outside. I think the next decade or so will be a would be a sort of like a very important phase for us to build deep tech. Right? I don't see we have done everything that we need to succeed, but I see things are moving in the right direction. And we just need to talk about this much more, to give examples of this much more, and encourage people to stay back. And also at a time when the world is shaking a little bit in terms of its globalized order, like you were mentioning. So it's a great time to have talent in India and build for India.
Mm. Yeah. But I'm just talking to you, and we've been doing this podcast for a while now, and this is one of the more serious podcasts in the sense that it feels like half of it went in talking about global security and national security and so on. The students joining now or who are coming into this field are young, so a large component of their life is also just living, right? And does it feel like the getting into AI would mean that you are sacrificing everything and just going for a cause? Is it like that?
Of course not. I mean, you can just build fun projects in AI that generate. Example fun project is, can you generate art uh, based on Indian styles? And it's a fun project. I don't think you're staking your career and value system for it, right? I think that definitely not.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. I quickly understood what you mean. Like instead of Ghibli art form, can I do a Wally art form of my family photo?
What I'm trying to stress is that uh, we don't tend to recognize when the forces change of it, right? And what we see is AI has that that why is there why is governments talking about AI? There's an AI summit, and uh, prime ministers and presidents are meeting and talking about it, and we are doing podcasts about IIT Madras and AI, right? So this has larger connotations for sure. But of course, it's a very, very interesting technology, algorithmically, systems engineering wise, from just building applications, right? And this is like a such a rich period, right? The serious overtone is because at the national level there are things to do, but at an individual level, this is a great time to study and build this tech. And by the way, it is in fact not just uh, those interested in computer science or programming. I think it's becoming something where whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an artist, whether you're a script writer, you're going to use this technology a lot. Right. So it's going to become very interesting from the point of view of combining what you know with what this technology is.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, in as a marketing person in our team, we use a lot of AI in almost every part of our work, and our workflow has changed so much in the last 3 years. We actually have a weekly meeting of the entire team to discuss what new AI modes are there for us to
Just weekly,
utilize.
not daily.
No, not really. Not really. We are not that fast. The community is very fast. Um, yeah, yeah. I think it's quite cool that AI has come into our lives in such a big way. Earlier, it was under the hood, error correction, KYC, stock prediction. It's something that you would hear other people doing. Face unlock. I think iPhone's face unlock was a big moment. Maps, navigation, but now it's here, like in our hands, um, in our palms. It's quite remarkable, and I guess what you're saying is that it's going to go further, 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 and it's just going to be a big part of our lives, like UPI and Aadhaar is, or maybe more than what UPI.
Much more. I was
Question for you: do you think my questions were AI generated?
um, I would say partially yes.
I did have this issue. I think in our research. So what happens is that we send our questions and our research work to the guest early on, and you pointed out a bunch of mistakes in our research work, and all of it was LLM generated. Yes, in fact, I was surprised because we use LLM to sort of do research on our guests, and then we cross check each source, and I guess the source itself must have been LLM generated. So and there's like some 3 layers of hallucination that had happened. But yeah, I think still it improves our workflow a lot. Um, I think one broad question as we sort of sign out of this, um, the human equation with machines is changing very dramatically, right? The way I thought of my phone earlier and the way I think of my phone now is quite different. And how do you see the future sort of evolving?
I'll take a broader and deeper view at it, right? So I think that two things very clearly. One is these machines are becoming very good, very fast, and with no clear boundaries on what they could achieve that we could specify today. Right? At the same time, we might increase our dependence on them as individuals, right? As whether at work, whether in personal life, we might increase our dependence on them, and like you said, be prone to some of their deficiencies. But I do wonder what the gap between human capability and machine capability looks like 10, 15 years down the line. And that's the scary way of putting it. The positive way of putting it is that we go back to the basics of uh, what human life is, right? And go back to um, what people have discovered since ages, and there are different views of it. And in our philosophy, it is about a self-realization. We go back to more real things. that we should be doing, and hopefully have a very positive and symbiotic relationship with AI. But there's quite a complex trajectory from where we are now to get to that positive point, right? And we'll have to navigate that properly.
I mean, as a creator, as a writer, I often wonder, and it's a question that I'm only been thinking now because machines have become so good. What does it take to be human? Like, what part of whatever I have written is me, has or is human, has become a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I think that question now we're getting into philosophy, which says that we're coming towards the end of the podcast. But I think we are who we are intrinsically, not judged by the outcome. Uh, I mean, your experience is a human experience, is your experience, right? That's as real as it can get, right? We and I think
Correct.
today's society we are judged a lot by what we do, the output of that, and so on. And I hope the positive place that we can be is to recognize that that's not what it is. Of course, AI can write a report, AI can analyze data, AI can write code. That's not what we should be judged by. It's a human experience, whatever, and the sanctity of that, which we have to recognize.
That's very, as you're saying that, I'm reminded when I was a student here, we had a lecture by, I think, Professor Ramchandran. I think he's a V.S. Ramchandran. He was a researcher in the brain science space. And he gave this beautiful lecture. And at the end of it, somebody asked him a question. And he said that it's possible in the future we'll know exactly the chemical reactions that cause love and you can simulate it. But if I told you that, would your experience of feeling love become any less real? And obviously, his point was that just because machines can do it, doesn't mean that the human experience is any less.
Absolutely. But what we should be, however, careful about is that we live in engineered systems, and machines becoming very powerful can affect what we experience. And while experience is ours and it's sort of sacred, we live in engineered systems, and hence engineering this whole system to be a positive system will
Okay.
have to be a deliberate decision.
I get what you're saying. I think our entire podcast on that. Before I go, I want to ask you, can you just dial back a bit? What does Sarvam do now? And what does Sarvam's next 1 year, 2 year, 5 year pipeline look like? Whatever you can share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are in the thick of things. We're going to build out the sovereign model this year. We're going to build out. We have been putting products out there. Our products have scaled up already. They are doing millions of calls now. We're analyzing data for various companies. Once we have the sovereign model built out, you will see that we'll have a lot more surface area to build for, and we are really looking at that scale out. In the 2 to 5 year timeline, we want to close the gap to being able to build the state of the art models of that day. What is state of art today and in 2 years will be very, very different. And we want to be uh, uh, able to build the best tech, build it with strategic intent, but also build it with the intent of democratizing this in a country like India, where we have a long, long way to go to providing the per capita resources required for every individual to succeed.
Mm. Nice. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Let's close it here. Great podcast. Okay. See you next time. Remember to save, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And if you want to connect with Pratyush, hit his website. Thank you.